unnecessary plastics with the environment for 1,000 years. That this bill would phase them out. It's also not just getting rid of problem plastics, but making recycling easier. You know, the most recyclable plastic product is the plastic beverage bottle. However, it gets mixed up when it's collected with PVC and polystyrene. It contaminates the recycling, and as a result, toxic byproducts are created during the recycling process, including benzene and styrene, two known cancer-causing substances. So this bill, by easing out the problem plastics, would produce a higher quality recycling stream so that it's easier to recycle and extract value from that recycled material, like plastic bottles. Lastly, the bill would phase out toxic additives in plastics that are unnecessary, including two toxic metals, antimony and cobalt, in plastic beverage bottles that can be easily replaced with safe material that doesn't expose consumers and the environment to environmental hazards. So this bill, again, would just take on a small fraction of the plastics that are out there. About 5% of plastics in the waste stream would be eased out of the market by 2025, making way for safer, more sustainable solutions. And now I'd like to, if it's okay for Representative Carlo to go, he has a hearing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Representative Carlo, representing Buxton and Hollis, would like to share some remarks.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I am Nathan Carlo. I have the privilege of representing House District 137, which includes part of my hometown of Buxton, Maine, and part of Hollis, Maine, in the Maine State Legislature. I'm here to speak in support of LD 1625 because I'm deeply concerned about the environmental impacts of plastic waste and the fact that so little of it will be recycled. This legislation will help get some of our most problematic plastic packaging out of our waste stream, which will reduce the types of packaging that can't be recycled or composted. I'm also pleased by the economic advantages that this bill can create for Maine by helping to create and retain good manufacturing jobs for the Maine people. Our forest products industry makes and sells sustainable packaging solutions that are much more environmentally sound alternatives to these problem plastics. LD 1645 will help create and expand new markets for fiber-based packaging by phasing out these problem plastics such as polystyrene foam peanuts. We have companies here in Maine that will benefit if we moved away from the unnecessary and harmful plastic packaging. The startup company close to my district, Tanbark Molded Fiber Products, which is based in Saco, Maine, is helping other Maine companies replace these problem plastic packaging with pulp-based alternatives that can be composted and recycled. There is also the Twin Rivers Mill in Madawaska, which cites growing demand for its specialty packaging papers. And last year, SAPI announced a $418 million investment in its Skowhegan Mill to make high-quality paperboard as an alternative to these problem plastic packaging. The legislature should pass LD 1645 to help ease some of the worst plastics out of the packaging market in an environmentally and an economically considerate way. It is imperative that Maine entrepreneurs and small businesses can thrive by making more environmentally friendly pulp and paper-based alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Carlo. Now I'd like to introduce Representative Lori Gramlich, who is the sponsor of the legislation.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I want to thank our friends from Defend Our Health and other environmental groups, along with Representative Carlo, for supporting this very important legislation. My name is Lori Gramlich, and I represent the lovely seaside community of Old Orchard Beach. And I'm also very proud to be the House Chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. For no surprise to you, I have been concerned about the issue of plastic pollution for a very long time. I worked on policies as a legislator to try to encourage moving away from single-use plastics. We've heard it before, and I'm going to keep saying it. Plastic pollution is a threat to our health and our environment, and we should do all we can to reduce the sources of plastic. LD 1645 does just that. I am so pleased again to work with Defend Our Health on this bill that will codify language from the U.S. Plastics Pact and require industry to keep their promises of moving away from unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging. Over 850 corporations, nonprofits, and local governments agree that it's time to move away from using plastic packaging that is not recyclable, compostable, or reusable. We are talking, as you've heard, we're talking about things like plastic packaging like foam peanuts, noodles. These are not foods that you eat, folks. These are plastics, and they block along with things like rigid clamshells and garment bags. Things that are unnecessary and that we know there are safer alternatives already in the marketplace. Maine has been a leader on this issue and many others relative to protecting our environment, particularly with regard to plastic and packaging, including our plastic bag ban that I was very proud to be a co-sponsor of. That bill came before our committee 4 years ago in the legislature. The plastic balloon ban that we heard in our committee as well, that I was also very pleased to support, and the ban on polystyrene food containers. We also passed a landmark extended producer responsibility bill that will help push industry to limit their packaging. This bill, LD 1645, is a continuation of this good work. And I'm going to do everything that I can in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee to get my colleagues around the horseshoe to unanimously pass this bill out of committee. And I will work tirelessly on the House floor and within the Senate to make sure that we get this over the finish line. It's critically important to have legislation that bans the unnecessary and toxic plastic packaging so that we can protect the health and environment of all Mainers. Thank you very much, and thanks again to my environmental friends.
Thank you, Representative Gramlich, for your leadership. Now we'll hear from Cole Cochran with Maine Youth Action.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I find it really important to have the youth voice actively advocating against plastic pollution and its disastrous effects. So we are eager to rally in support of LD 1645. My generation faces the brunt of the climate crisis. We'll face a multitude of problems such as environmental degradation, poor water and air quality, and intensified natural disasters. This paints a grim outlook for my future, and it is imperative that we are making decisions to address it now rather than later. After all, the policy of today will determine the reality of tomorrow. What we must acknowledge as part of the problem is our plastic pollution. It is a major contributor to the climate crisis, with over 99% of plastics made from fossil fuels and 3.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions coming from plastics alone. Moreover, the general disposability of plastic, plus the centuries it takes to decompose, makes it a threat to the integrity of our environment, the sustainability of our future, and our overall health and well-being. The harmful effects of climate change that my generation faces will only compound if we continue to use plastic at its current scale. As a state, we have committed to ambitious climate targets. Though how can we truly expect to achieve these targets without addressing our plastic pollution? My generation simply cannot afford to fall short of these goals, and we must take every action necessary in order to achieve them. It then becomes clear that the use of plastic cannot and will not be a part of Maine's future. We need to take urgent action and phase out the use of plastic in the state of Maine. LD 1645 serves as a necessary and robust measure. The bill champions our climate goals, protects our cherished environment, and promotes sustainable practices. Young Mainers need bills like LD 1645 because we not only need to bolster our response to the climate crisis, but we also need to promote the health and well-being of our communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cole. Lastly, we will hear from Beth Ahern with Maine Conservation Voters.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Beth Ahern, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Maine Conservation Voters. We are a nonprofit dedicated to protecting Maine's environment, democracy, and climate future. MCV supports LD 1645 for several reasons, and I will focus on the climate benefits that this bill offers. I'd also like to thank Representative Gramlich for sponsoring this important piece of legislation. Reducing problematic plastic packaging has climate benefits, as my colleague Cole says. Plastics generate heat-trapping gases at every stage of their life cycle. Limiting the production of wasteful single-use plastics and reducing the amount of plastics burned in incinerators will cut greenhouse gases. U.S. emissions from plastics incineration in 2015 produced the equivalent of 5.9 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. That's a lot. Based on projections from the World Energy Council, if plastics production and incineration increase as expected, greenhouse gas emissions will increase to 49 million metric tons by 2030 and 91 million metric tons by 2050. Maine's policies alone won't reverse this trend, but a significant increase in the recycling rate by phasing out materials that interfere with and degrade recycling would certainly cut local greenhouse gas emissions caused by those incinerating unrecyclable plastic waste. We hope the legislature passes this significant piece of legislation this year. Doing so will protect our health and our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. Now we've heard all the reasons why we need to prevent plastic pollution. We'd be happy to take any questions if there are any at this time.
If there's any research available, what is the cost for businesses to phase out the use of these unnecessary plastics at all? Have you heard any feedback about that?
Many of the available solutions are cost comparable. It shouldn't be a matter of high cost. Cost should not be a barrier. There are commercially available alternatives on the market already in many cases.
Just to clarify, you're saying that there is an equal comparison, so they can just use an equal alternative to keep it safe, basically.
Yes, there are available alternatives that work just as well, that cost about the same, and we just need to get off of the problem plastics and move to these sustainable solutions like starch-based peanuts instead of styrofoam peanuts, and sustainable fiber-based packaging, preferably manufactured in Maine rather than plastic packaging.
What percentage of emissions would this decrease? I understand you said that this would decrease emissions. What percentage is there any data that you guys have available to talk about decreasing emissions?
Well, Cole and Beth cited greenhouse gas emissions associated with plastic. All plastics, production of all plastics, has a growing carbon footprint. In fact, it's probably the only sector of the economy whose carbon footprint is rapidly increasing. I've heard estimates. Cole said 3.6%. I've heard 5% to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions associated with plastic production. So if we chip away and ease out and replace just the most dangerous plastics, we're making progress. This bill would eliminate about 5% of the plastics in packaging, so that emission reduction would be associated with that reduction in volume. Good. Any other questions?
My last question is, why should community members care? Those who are not environmentalists, like, how does this apply to every person?
Yeah, plastics affect everyone. We can't. They surround us every day. There are dangerous chemicals that migrate out of the plastics into our home, into our beverages, that need to be eliminated. And people should care about the impact that plastics create, not only when they're disposed of, but think about where they're produced. They're produced in the Gulf Coast, in Texas, Louisiana. They have a terrible, burdensome pollution problem on low-income communities of color. These need to be ended. This is a matter that we all should care about as a matter of social justice and environmental health.
Well said.
Yep.
Can I add to that? And to underscore what Mike said, for me personally, it's a matter of environmental justice, and it's a matter of public health. And so, 5 years ago, before I was elected to the legislature, I'm a social worker by profession. if somebody would have told me that I would have been on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and be the House Chair of this committee, I might not have believed them. But here
you are.
But here I am, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, because while I've worked my whole professional career on social justice issues, we all together collectively, we have an opportunity to work on environmental justice issues and to assure that we are doing everything we can for our future generations, because they're right here. I got a heck of a lot more in my rearview mirror than I have in my windshield, and it's incumbent upon me and people in my generation, younger and older, to do everything we can to protect our environment and to protect our public health.
I did have a question. Many would say that to help with the plastic pollution, that's why you recycle. But you did mention that there is a bad way to recycle. Can you explain?
Yeah, this bill would actually improve recycling, because right now our recycling stream gets contaminated by problem plastics, and that makes it more difficult to recycle. It reduces the value of the recycled material. It creates toxic byproducts that may threaten human health. So by getting rid of the most dangerous plastics, we're improving the plastics that can be recycled, like plastic bottles. That's one. In fact, the Representative Granick made reference to the U.S. Plastic Pact, this industry stakeholder group that came together primarily to improve recycling, to enable us to achieve a circular economy where the materials we use are reused back into the economy. And so the driving impetus for phasing out these unnecessary problematic plastics is to improve recycling and to get closer to a truly circular economy that doesn't have toxic byproducts all along the way. Great. Any other questions? Thanks so much for coming out. Appreciate it.
More to come at the public hearing, where I'm